The Five Nivaranas, Buddha's Teaching of the Five Hindrances, by Brian Taylor. The Buddha left home at 29. He was a prince, heir to a small kingdom, and married with a son. He was in the prime of life. Then it is said he saw the four signs: an old man, a sick man, a corpse being carried to cremation, and a monk in meditation beneath a tree. This focused his mind on old age, disease and death, the universal characteristics which are present in every human life, no matter how princely and well endowed. Dissatisfaction arose in him, which no changes to his lifestyle could abolish, so long as these characteristics remained. The monk in meditation beneath a tree made him realize he was not alone in his realization. Others too had become disenchanted with the impermanence and ultimate unsatisfactoriness of life, and were trying to find a way out. In every generation there have been many who have experienced the same profound disillusion. Mostly they have tried to improve the quality of their temporary lives, making the most of life as they found it. Or if their disillusion goes deeper, they have continued their search for truth within the comfortable confines of their society, its colleges, schools, libraries and monasteries. Few like this prince have been so serious as to give up status, friends, wealth, family, home and even the clothes off their backs, to go off in search for the deathless. Of those who have done so, how many have succeeded? The prince himself visited the wise men of his time and place, such as Alara and Udaka. He listened to their teachings, put them into practice. He attained what they had attained. Each offered him the position of joint teacher. He declined. He was still not satisfied. After 6 years of ascetic practices, he finally achieved the goal he had set himself, and devised a method and techniques by which those who wanted to follow in his footsteps could and can tread the path. From then on he was called Buddha, the Awakened One. Awakened to what? To the unsatisfactoriness of life as we experience it from birth to death. What goal? Freedom from everything that is unsatisfactory, including death. What path? The path to freedom. The fourth noble truth: right seeing, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This path is intended to assist an honest and straightforward man who pursues truth for its own sake and not just for his personal advantage. He is able to grasp and puts into practice the fundamental ethic: not doing to other living beings what you would not wish to be done to you. Central to the successful treading of this path is bringing the mind under control. It can then be purified and becomes a useful tool rather than an unreliable master. This leads as a knock-on effect to purification of thought, speech and bodily activities. This normalizes one's relations with other living beings and the world in which we and they live. The hindrances. Buddha identified 5 Nivaranas, hindrances or blockages, which prevent us from seeing the truth about ourselves and the world around us. Kama, chanda, sensory desire; vyapada, ill will; tinna, mida, sloth and torpor; udacha, kukucha, restlessness and regret; vicikiccha, doubt. They also stand in the way of our being able to experience the freedom of Nibbana for ourselves. One or more of these obstacles is present at every stage of the path until the ultimate attainment of the Arahant, the Deathless. These hindrances affect the senses. The senses are the fundamentals of life itself. The senses. The function of our 5 external senses is to provide conscious access to the outside world into which we have been born. It is as though we turn up in a spaceship on an alien planet, which in many ways is what we do. We come equipped to explore our new world. Eyes, windows to see the landscape. Ears, microphones to detect sounds. Nose, ventilator to test the air quality. Tongue, instrument to test for food. Skin, membrane of external sensors to register heat and cold, pressure and invasion. Stripped to the essentials, being born as a human being starts out very much like this. The number and range of external senses varies considerably among the different classes of beings. The more external senses we have, the more comprehensive our perception of the external world will be. Think of the different worlds as perceived by earthworms, eagles, blind men, deaf men, butterflies, intestinal worms, coelacanths, etc. The 6th sense. We also bring with us an on-board computer, mind, to analyze the data the senses collect and tell us how to react, or even to tell us that our best chance of survival is to leave at once and go back where we came from. Caught deaths. Those whom the gods love die young, etc. Our reactions, thoughts, words and deeds are conditioned by the interpretation put upon the external sense data by this 6th sense, the mind. These interpretations are programmed to enable us to react in ways which maximize our chances of survival and minimize our chances of non-survival. The more complex the 6th sense is, the more complex our reactions will be, but not necessarily the more accurate, for this is where the hindrances can put in their appearance. The source of the hindrances. Our 6th sense may and does go beyond just providing data relevant to survival and non-survival, and instead introduces a tendency for preferences, likes and dislikes, pleasures and displeasures. The complex then becomes the complicated. Our perceptions of the world become distorted by our minds and may actually give rise to reactions that are non-survival. Example: alcohol is a stimulant and a poison. Like it, it's nice. Like it too much, you may become addicted to it. It then becomes a must-have it and can't do without it. Then you may end up literally drinking yourself to death. An obvious case of non-survival. The way the hindrances work is seen very clearly in the first 2. Sensory desire and ill will make a pair. They are opposites, but not in the same way that desire and no desire are the opposites. Where desire is the opposite of no desire, it is in the sense that desire is the opposite of freedom from compulsive desire. This is the discovery that can lead to liberation from suffering. No desire, ultimately no suffering. Absolute freedom from suffering is the goal of humanity, whether it realizes it or not. As far as the hindrances are concerned, what sensory desire and ill will have in common is that they both hinder us from achieving this freedom from suffering. Both are active emotions, outward movements from the mind of energy and feeling, but they are opposite kinds of emotion. They are opposites in the sense that hot water is the opposite of cold water. Certainly, hot is the opposite from cold, but both are water flowing from the water tap. If you want to put an end to hot and cold water, you have to turn off the water at the tap. If you want to put an end to desire and ill will, you have to turn off that outward reaching energy from the mind tap, where it is alternately pulling in its likes in order to grasp them, or grasping its dislikes in order to push them away and reject them. Survival. In its uncontaminated form, this outward moving energy is simply exploratory, concerned with survival. We see this very clearly in animals, but as a part of the exploratory activities of the senses, consciousness triggers feeling. Pro-survival awareness is felt as liking and non-survival as disliking. This need not be a problem. Consider the procreation of the species, which is obviously pro-survival, or the good taste of wholesome food, but it can develop into preference and aversion. It then links with the future and the past. This tendency spreads and accumulates until the original natural protective reaction to phenomena perceived at the sense doors is taken over by wanting and aversion. To the extent that one identifies with the body and the mind, the phenomena then become inseparably linked to I, me, and mine, the ego. The ego. The Buddha lists this false identification among the 10 fetters, Sangyojana, at number 8. It is mana, the giving rise to a false idea of a separate self. The fetters, Sangyojana. Sangyojana means mental fetter, chain. A fetter is something that holds you as a prisoner, so that you lose your freedom and power to escape. Except in the case of masochists, fetters are usually applied by others. In Buddhist psychology, it is shown that the mental Sangyojanas are located within ourselves. Escape is not therefore a matter of breaking free from the fetters, but of letting go of our hold on them. Fetters and hindrances are just different ways of looking at the same thing. We reach out to grab something because we want to hold on to it, but we also reach out to grab something in order to push it away or destroy it. Either way, we are literally stuck with it. We reach out of our spaceship and grasp at the sense phenomena we have come to crave for. Or we see them as fetters which grasp us, and this leads to ill will. In both cases, the process and result are the same. The fetter cannot grasp your hand if you don't reach towards it with your hand. Think of putting your hand between the bars to stroke the lion. Suffering. All the hindrances result in loss of freedom and equanimity, suffering. Now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, being with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging or suffering. The 5 aggregates, khandhas. The 5 aggregates are forms, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. The Buddha asserts that these 5 factors constitute a living being's mental and physical existence, and are therefore the basis for all our suffering. Close examination of them in our life continuum provides a continuous demonstration that there is to be found in mind and body no trace of a permanent, enduring individual soul or self. The gate to freedom from suffering is now wide open. 1. Kamachanda, sensory desire. This is the desire, chanda, for A. sense objects, kama, B. for the senses themselves, and C. for the feelings experienced while using the senses. It is that particular type of wanting which, when using the 5 senses of sight, sound, smell, taste, and physical touch, is seeking for happiness rather than for information. Humans are currently more susceptible to this than animals. We look out from our spaceship and get an overview of space and the objects it contains with our eyes. This gives us the lie of the land. We turn up the microphone and use our ears and gather what information we can from interpreting sound waves. The ventilator nose provides a sample of the air so that our computer can indicate whether or not it is safe to wind down the window and let it in. The food tester functions as the tongue. Finally, the external sensors, skin, enable us to monitor the effect on our spaceship of temperature and pressure from the moving and stationary objects so that we know which ones to avoid. All the while our computer is working continuously with the inflow of data to organize and evaluate it in categories: pro-survival, anti-survival, neutral, don't know, and also memory. This can be crucial. The computer is relating its findings to other information stored on the hard drive of previous visits to this and other planets and this or other spaceships. Simply put, we see a location which it seems will protect our spaceship, us, from the objects around us and the weather. It does the job and we park ourselves there. We can hear what goes on around us and we use this to our benefit. The line sounds a bit close, we change our location. We smell the plants and fruits and refer them to our tongues and taste buds to test their palatability. We feel with our skins that the sun is too hot and we move into the shade. The rocks are too hard, so we sit on the grass. Our minds continuously calculate the pros and cons of location, food, and environment, and we use our free will to adjust and improve the circumstances of our lives and environment, all in the pursuit of survival. In this, we are doing what all the other living beings are doing, with varying degrees of consciousness. To begin with, the cat shares a similar level of consciousness with us. From the beginning and throughout its life, the tree does not. It behaves in a way that seems to us automatic or even unconscious. However, there is no life without a certain degree of consciousness, otherwise it would not be alive. Then, at some point, a complication arises when, instead of reacting automatically like all of the vegetable kingdom, or semi-automatic like most of the animal kingdom, we identify with our responses and the sense objects to which they relate. Thoughts arise, I like that, I don't like that. We even use phrases as, no, the colour's wrong, I don't think that's me. This is where the hindrance comes in. It prevents us from being objective in our perceptions and responses. It starts with, that's not good, superimposes, I like it, moves on to, it may be bad but I like it, then, it's bad for me but I want it anyway. Finally, if I want it, it can't be bad for me. At this stage the mind becomes skilled at distorting information, so that it accommodates my likes and dislikes and filtering out whatever information doesn't suit me and my purposes. It is then a fully fledged hindrance standing between me and seeing the simple truth about anything. It is a Ouija ignorance, not seeing what is obviously really there. To rectify this, the Buddha starts his Noble Eightfold Path with 1. Right view, samadhi. If alcohol is a poison and it's bad for you, see it for what it really is and give it up. If that is still too difficult, try harder with 6. Right effort, sama-vayama. 2. Vyapada, ill will. This covers all kinds of thoughts based on the desire to reject. They are accompanied by feelings of hostility, resentment and bitterness. These range from the merest irritation to full-blown hatred, resulting in physical violence, wars and genocides. It forms a pair with sensory desire. On the surface, this seems to make it the opposite of the first hindrance, which is based on energy that manifests as desire. But if that were the case, the opposite would the absence of energy manifesting as anything at all. Just as turning off the hot tap doesn't mean cold water coming out, it means no water comes out at all, whether hot or cold. Our spaceman doesn't just say no thank you and wind up the window when a native vendor offers to sell him a local souvenir. He leans out through the open window, grabs him and swears at him. As a hindrance, ill will can be external towards others. They shouldn't be allowed to sell such rubbish. Or internal ill will towards ourselves. I hate myself for behaving like that towards someone trying to make a living. Sense desire, kamachanda, the first mental hindrance, collects and holds on to what we consider pleasurable and right. Ill will, vyapada, does the opposite. It collects and holds on to those things we consider unpleasurable and wrong. Kamachanda induces us to seek pleasure and truth outside of ourselves. Vyapada deludes us into believing that the truth is in us and that we are right. So we are unable to rise above ourselves, even to the degree of respecting others. Anger is an intensification of ill will. Vyapada is always present, at least in latent form, when Kama Chanda is present. Vyapada enshrouds us with a thick cloud of denial. We live in a private, unlimited mental world of uncreating and surrounding ourselves with an external world which mirrors it. We deny everything and anything we perceive that threatens our views on what we like. Vyapada prevents or retards spiritual growth in a powerful way. Spiritual growth depends on the impartial and honest pursuit of truth. The ego doesn't look in order to see what is actually there. It looks in order to see if what the ego actually wants or doesn't want is there, and reacts accordingly. 3. Tina, Mida, sloth and torpor. Tina is a lack of motivating power in the mind. Mida is a corresponding lack of motivating energy in the body. The two go together. With sloth, a deliberate attempt is being made to shut out the world by dimming the senses, eyes half closed, mental earplugs in the ears. With torpor, sedatives, inadequate exercise, and excessive food provide the physical breeding ground to encourage sloth. Dullness in the mind means the physical senses are diminished. This leads to an inadequate attention to the body's needs. This means increasing slothfulness. Together, heaviness of body and dullness of mind drag one down into a disabling inertia and thick depression. At its extreme, one is totally at effect and unable to motivate oneself in any way. Health deteriorates. The next stage is diminishing consciousness. This is a state closer to death than sleep. The senses are gradually switched off, often with the drugs or alcohol, which can accompany cause sloth and torpor. 4. Udacha, kukucha, restlessness and regret. Udacha, excitement, restlessness. It is like water whipped up by the wind. It causes the mind to fly from one thought to another, often rushing around in circles. Kuchuka, wrongly performedness. Ku plus krat plus ya. Regret, remorse, uneasiness of conscience or worry. This results from having done something wrong, or even just regret at something that went wrong from our point of view. It is a state of mind which is agitated and scattered. The image often given is of a layer of dust which has been stirred up, or a bowl of still water into which more water is poured, so that ripples go out in all directions. Whenever the mind is working, it is moving. This in itself is not a problem. What creates the hindrance is when it is moving out of control. This one discovers when one tries to stop it. Since the mind comes first and everything which is to be done starts with the mind, one cannot overestimate the seriousness of the consequences of mind being out of control. When one says mind is out of control, one usually means it is out of one's own control. But the dust doesn't stir itself up, nor does the water agitate itself. So what is controlling the mind? Associative thinking, one thought leading to another, feelings, memories, desires, sense objects appearing at the sense doors. One hears something or sees something or smells something, or one's body itches or hurts. The list is endless. Many things can and do take control of what one thinks of as one's own mind. With kukucha, regret, uneasy conscience, the mind compulsively dwells on and grasps after the past. It endlessly replays events and experiences whose roots lie in dissatisfaction. But the past cannot be changed. Actions are only possible in present time. In the present, one can deal with the karmic consequences of those past events, and or learn from one's mistakes or those of others, and thereby create a different future. But just dwelling on the past creates a restless and morbid mental states which take control of the mind. Together, restlessness and regret create a state of continual and uncontrollable unease, which promotes action, not because actions are required, but because one cannot remain inactive in mind and body. Anything that is done in this state is liable to have results which are unsatisfactory for oneself and others. At its most extreme, one can become totally at effect on it and unable to restrain oneself in any way. It leads to hyper-consciousness. One cannot sleep. The senses cannot be switched off. Sometimes a fuse is blown somewhere and one lapses into unconsciousness. This is why one so rarely moves smoothly towards an intended goal. It is as though one sets off to drive somewhere, but a host of other people keep trying to grab the steering wheel and steer off in different directions. Restlessness and regret, uddhacca and kukucca, are also a hindrance to meditation. One can't make progress in meditation if one can't stop the mind drifting off the meditation object. Even if one is not a meditator, they presume the pressure that builds up under the momentum of constant restlessness and changes of direction results in stress. This stress makes one's life and relationships dysfunctional. So whether one is a meditator or just someone who wants to bring his mind under control in ordinary everyday life, it is essential to deal with this hindrance. There are two ways of doing this, both requiring perseverance. The first is concentration. One focuses the mind on a single chosen object. The image given is of tying an animal to a post until it stops trying to run away. It then lies down peacefully. The second is investigation. One patiently undertakes the task of observing the mind and its workings from moment to moment in order to thoroughly understand how it operates. One's growing understanding is then used to gradually bring it under control. It is essential to make certain that one's ethics are firmly in place. This ensures that one no longer does in the present those things which are likely to become causes of restlessness and regret in the future. Both methods require patience and perseverance, but the rewards of success are enormous, even for everyday life. Some people find it easier than others. This is because the more one has neglected one's mind, the harder it is to put to rights. If a gardener goes off for a few weeks, for a few years, what he finds when he comes back will be daunting. Nature has taken over. Neglect of one's mind may have lasted much longer than a few years. Karma is perfect. Just as sensory desire and ill will make a pair, so do sloth and torpor, and restlessness and regret also make a pair. What they have in common is shutting down your awareness of things you do not want and do not want to see. With sloth and torpor, this is obvious. But even hyper-excitability is an inability or unwillingness to see what is actually presenting itself to the five senses. You are so busy excitedly abusing the unfortunate vendor that you just don't notice that he has been replaced by the local policeman. Sloth and torpor and restlessness and regret are also opposites from the point of view of outward moving energy. Sloth and torpor indicates a deficiency of energy reaching out. The one in the spaceship is slumped in his seat, half asleep, with the windows closed and curtains drawn. Restlessness and regret indicate an excess of energy reaching out. The spaceman can't sit still, jumps frantically up and down all the time until he collapses, exhausted, in his seat. 5. Vicikiccha, doubt. Vicikiccha literally means the urge to think about. The prefix V has a sense of duality or separation, and kikiccha comes from the verb form kichati. He thinks about, bends towards, intends. Vichikichati is often translated as he doubts. Vicikiccha, doubt, also appears as the second of the 10 fetters, Sangyojana. Buddhists usually translate it as a lack of confidence in the Dhamma and doubt about the Buddha's teaching. It certainly includes this doubt, but it actually refers to any doubts. Therefore it applies to all human beings, Buddhists or not, who manifest mental wavering and instability. Until one has completely freed oneself from all attachment to existence, one will constantly have doubts about all kinds of things which are part and parcel of existence. Livelihood, the ways of the world, relationship, the past and the future. But all these are things that exist only in the samsara, the endless wandering on from birth to death. It is like living in a prison, with one's attention entirely involved in activities within the prison. Should one paint the walls, change the curtains, install carpets, rearrange the room, make improvements, complain to the management? Once one is convinced that it is a prison, that it is not a place to linger in, and that one is holding the exit key in one's hand, all one's doubts disappear, and one makes straight for the door to escape, once and for all. But until one is convinced, doubt remains. This state has the nature of wavering. It appears as indecision and a divided attitude towards many things. It is associated with the tendency of the ego not to want to consider anything which might disturb the laziness of its comfort zone. It is lack of the mental energy, desire to think things through and come to a conclusion. Often it is accompanied alternatively by numbers 3, sloth and torpor, and 4, restlessness. It prevents the mind from resting and becoming peaceful. It hinders both sleep at night and the ability to deal with the challenges of waking life by day. It is a major obstacle in meditation. The remedy is 1. Developing concentration so that the mind doesn't rush around like a butterfly. 2. Unprejudiced and continuous investigation into the nature and workings of all things, including the mind. 3. Careful and continuous observation of basic sila ethics. This normalizes one's relationship with other beings and one's environment. One no longer thinks, says and does things which have undesirable and unsettling consequences. Conclusion. The Digha and Majjhima Nikayas contain the fullest exposition of what the early Buddhists considered the original teachings of the Buddha to have been. The importance of the hindrances is put in their context here. A typical and comprehensive example in the Digha is the Samanapala Sutta, the fruits of the life of a recluse. It tracks in great detail the progress of a disciple from his first going forth from the life of a householder. It lists the methodical stages of practice, realizations and attainments catalogued by the Buddha. This culminates in his ultimate arrival at the state of being the Arahant, the one who has achieved the final state of permanent release from continual rebirth in the samsara. The samsara is the endless wandering on from birth to death, the state of suffering and unsatisfactoriness in which all beings are immersed until they escape. It stretches from the lowest hells to the highest heavens. The inhabitants of our world, humans, animals, right down to microscopic beings, are sandwiched somewhere in between. Escape. The path begins when a householder or a man of inferior birth hears the truth about suffering, its universality, its cause, its end, and the path and practice that leads to that final end of all suffering. This seeker after truth realizes full of hindrances is a household life, a path for the dust of passion. He gives up his attachment to the possessions and concerns of this world. He practices self-restraint with regard to ethics, sila. He adopts and trains himself in the basic precepts, beginning with putting an end to the killing of living beings. Firmly established in this, his conscience is clear and he has no fear of any beings he may encounter. He experiences within himself a sense of unalloyed ease. He is guarded with regard to the senses and does not become entranced by sense objects. He does not allow his mind to grasp after sense objects in a way that might lead to attachment and disappointment. He is mindful and self-possessed in thought, word and deed of everything, all the time, from moment to moment. He is content with sufficient clothes to protect his body and sufficient food to keep his body going. He is then free to concentrate on putting an end to hankering after the world and its contents, and on purifying his mind of the hindrances. He finds himself as freed from debt, ethics, rid of disease, unwholesome states of mind, out of prison, free from the shackles of cravings, a free man liberated in mind, and secure, safe from future becoming. Gladness rises up within him when he realizes this. Having reached this state, he can attain the jhanas, and he fills his body with that ease which has no excitability in it. Furthermore, based on these progressive states in meditation, he can develop the attainment of various kinds of idis, supernormal powers, each of which is higher and sweeter than the last. Finally, with the final and permanent extinction of the hindrances, he achieves this, O King, an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world, and higher and sweeter than the last, and there is no fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world, that is higher and sweeter than this. In a word, Nibbana. Appendix. This discourse, the fruits of the life of a recluse, Samanapala Sutta, was delivered to King Ajatasattu one full moon at his first meeting with the Buddha. Ajatasattu was the son of King Bimbisara. He had his father imprisoned and killed in order to obtain his kingdom. After hearing this discourse, he saw the error of his ways and became a strong devotee of the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. He erected a large stupa for the bones and ashes of the Buddha after his funeral. He was present at the first Buddhist council at the Satapani rock cave in Rajagaha. Ajatasattu was murdered by his own son, who was greedy for his kingdom, a classic historical example of karma.